think that the term artificial intelligence is baloney. I know it's used, and I use it sometimes because people understand, but it's unfortunate that it became kind of the staple. A term, the hallmark of intelligence is creativity. And there's nobody but humans that exhibit that. But in reality, when you actually study these models, you understand that they cannot be creative, no matter what they tell you. Okay, they can absorb huge amounts of data. They can summarize them, compress them, and do pattern, basically pattern seeking, pattern repetition. That's what these models do. So when they're trying to sell you AI or neural networks as somehow replacing a human or competing with the human, that is a lie, right? That's just simply mathematically, it is not true.
With the global economy being in shambles and central bankers moving towards a reset, it's never been a better time to protect your wealth by owning precious metals. Contact Andy at milesfranklin.com. Tell him Sarah sent you. He promised me he will guarantee you the lowest price anywhere in the country. Remember, email Andy at milesfranklin.com and tell him Sarah sent you. It's never been a better time to protect your future than now. Welcome to Business Game Changers. I'm Sarah Westall. I have a really fun conversation with Daniel Satchkov. He's the founder of Bastyon. And we are going to start doing I don't know if it's going to be every month or how often it's going to be, but we're going to do a tech series. We're starting with AI. I can't believe how passionate he is about this topic. And he wants to talk about AI when it talks. This one's just AI in general, but he's going to talk about AI in genetics and AI in blockchain. And we're going to get into all sorts of creative tech science topics. And we're starting with his passion of AI. And then we are going to bring me into it a little bit too on different science and tech topics of what I've been building in my knowledge base. But we're starting with his. He's so passionate. He has applied mathematics degree, and he's done a lot of lectures on AI. And so we are going to focus on that first. This is going to be just a compilation of the interview, maybe some of the more fun, juicy parts. But if you want to see the full interview, you can go to Bastyon, and I have the link below. Or for my members, I do have it for free, and you can see that at sarahwestall.tv or on the Ebonier, and there's links below for that as well. So this is really fun. But before we get into this, make sure you go to sarahwestall.com, sign up for my newsletter, and while you're there, please support my affiliates. That's how I keep this show going. So let's get into the highlight reel of my interview with Daniel Satchkov, the founder of Bastyon. And then remember, you can see it at Bastyon for free, or you can sign up with my membership, and they can also see it. Okay, here's Daniel. Hi, Daniel. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
This is going to be a fun series. We talked about doing a technology and science series and talking about the edge of what's going on. And our first topic is going to be on AI. And you actually want to talk about AI first. And I think this is really great because there is so much confusion on this topic. People go all the way from thinking AI is just, computer programming to it's the sentient being that's going to take over the world. And it's like, I really don't think the AI is a sentient being that's going to take over the world. I do think it's dangerous, but it sure the heck isn't a sentient being that's going to take over the world. Can you talk at a high level where you think the technology of AI is at? And then we can talk about what the dangers are and then also what the positives are, because not everything about technology isn't bad. All this new science, it's just if bad guys are in charge of it, it's bad. But AI is something that even if good guys are in charge of it, we have to be careful. But can you talk about what AI really is?
Yeah, so first of all, there are a couple of things to say here. First of all, I think that the term artificial intelligence is baloney. I know it's used, and I use it sometimes because people understand, but it's unfortunate that it became kind of the staple. A term, the hallmark of intelligence is creativity. And there's nobody but humans that exhibit that. So creativity, artificial intelligence, no matter what they tell you, like they can actually tell you that, AI painted these paintings or created this music, but there's no creativity there. There's absolutely no. It's actually an interesting fact that, you can use AI to write very elaborate jazz music, and it's done. I mean, I build models like that myself. It's pretty fun,
That's actually
but
kind
you
of cool.
never. Sorry.
I said that's actually kind of cool, but keep going.
That's actually kind of cool, but you cannot have an AI that will write a new Beatles song. That's the thing, you know what I mean? That's the difference. Jazz, and again, I'm not a musician, so don't be offended or anything. For all its awesomeness and technical prowess, is kind of there's a lot of repetition. There's a lot of pattern seeking, if you
Yeah.
will, right? That's what these models do. They can absorb a huge amount of data. They can produce variations, but these variations are patterns. And I know this is not, this is arguable, but that part is arguable of jazz and, let's say, pop music. And I'm not particularly a fan of like pop music, though. Of course, Beatles songs, many are great. You don't have AI that can produce a Beatles song, and you never will, because there's some creativity involved in that. You can only copy, right? Jazz music is more pattern seeking, and so you can, and even probably for a jazz artist who's creative, that music will not ring true, because they can sense that it's pattern repetition. Yeah, it's elaborate, and it's kind of it's awesome. It awes. It's almost like sublime at first. Oh, this is awesome. But in reality, when you actually study these models, you understand that they cannot be creative, no matter what they tell you. Okay, they can absorb huge amounts of data. They can summarize them, compress them, and do pattern, basically pattern seeking, pattern repetition. That's what these models do. Sometimes in the technical world, they're called machine learning.
Yes,
Right? Machine
exactly.
learning. But in fact, they're nothing. They're not. This is the wrong term as well. It's funny enough. I use it a lot more because it's better, but it's still far from reality, because learning involves something called generalization. So, like, I look at many different cases of something and I generalize to some. Basically, like, in philosophy, right? Plato, you have this Platonic forms. So anything that we observe in the material world is basically a case of some ideal Platonic form. So a human being can generalize and create a form. It's also a creative process. That's the thing. We're going back to the creation and creativeness. Human beings are endowed with creativeness, so you can actually look at different things, and then you can create this ideal form of these things, a generalization. Neural machine learning doesn't do that, so it doesn't learn, strictly speaking.
But
There
can't
are
you even,
examples.
with creativity, you can even jump. Like maybe have creative patterns, but then you can jump. And I don't know how to explain. I don't know if there's a technical term for that, but you jump to a new idea and then tie it back to the other ideas. I mean,
Yeah,
it's something a computer couldn't do.
Yeah, you basically trying to look at the sort of.
I don't know how to explain. I don't know if
Generalization. Neural machine learning doesn't do that, so it doesn't learn, strictly speaking.
But
There
can't
are
you
examples.
even, with creativity, you can even jump. Like maybe have creative patterns, but then you can jump. And I don't know how to explain. I don't know if there's a technical term for that, but you jump to a new idea and then tie it back to the other ideas. I mean, it's something a computer couldn't do.
Yeah, you basically trying to look at the sort of the essence of the thing that's not in the thing itself, right? It's not explicitly, it's something implicit.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, but to give a more precise example, I'll send you an image later. You can post it under a video. It's from a scientific article. There's something called adversarial examples. So somebody who understands the math of the neural network, it's using very elaborate, calculus. Well, actually not so elaborate, but a lot of calculus. So if you know the math of the neural network, you can take a picture of something. Let's say, like, you have a neural network that recognizes pictures. They're very common now, right? It's a cat or a dog. It's a monkey or it's a panda, right? Monkey or a panda. So the model is very, very good. Usually they can recognize these things, because no creative, right? It's just pattern recognition.
Yep.
But you can take the model and you can twist it just a little bit. You can feed it an image of a monkey. And it's to any human being, it's going to be clear that it's a monkey. But when you twist it a little bit, you just some pixels that are not even visible to the human eye. You change the pixels around in a certain way using the math, and all of a sudden the model will be 100% sure that it's a panda.
Interesting. Yeah, because they have different
And
decisions.
this is a very well-known problem. I'll send you a picture of this. I have a picture from a scientific article. So the model was sure that it was a monkey. I'm sorry, sure it was a monkey. Then you change a few pixels that are not even visible to the human eye, but you do it in a special pattern to beat the model, and then all of a sudden it thinks it's a panda, even though it's clearly still a monkey.
But that's where the danger is with AI, is because once it assumes patterns and they're wrong, then we have to make sure we can break out of this stuff. And it's if human beings depend on it so much where people are hosed. And you see it in just basic computer programs where some business is automating their stuff, and then you get stuck in this process of hell because the workers can't break out of their process. You're stuck, and it's so stupid, and it happens to everybody. And this could be on steroids. So that's where a lot of the concern happens, or where you don't have the human ability to break out of that process. That can be really scary when you're talking about life or death situations, or bad guys are in charge of things. But I want to, AI, some people think that AI is the computer creating new algorithms. So, but it's still pattern recognition and rudimentary algorithms that are based on pattern recognition and not on the creative process, right?
Yeah, that's where I think the analogy, the third name that is used for these things is neural networks. And it is used because long ago, when people developed this math, they assumed that the way math works is very similar to neurons, to neurons in the brain, for example. And I think that there's enough data to show that is not true, that it's not similar to neurons. But more importantly is that people don't understand the degree of complexity of a human mind. Okay, the so-called neural networks are very, very complex now. They're growing in complexity. They're growing very fast. They're really powerful. I'm not belittling their capability, but the thing about it is that the human brain is not like 10 times more complicated. It's not 100 times. It's many, many orders of magnitude more elaborate than any neural network out there. So when they're trying to sell you AI or neural networks as somehow replacing a human or competing with the human, that is a lie, right? That's just simply mathematically it is not true. A more complex system has more ability to process data, and that really depends, like its capacity, right? The number of neurons, the number of hubs, and all this stuff. In the most elaborate neural networks are not even close to the dumbest, human being in the world. So the question then should be asked is, why is there this hype about neural networks taking over the world and so on? And by the way, I'm not saying that it's about, I mean, there's a lot of historical examples where a lower intelligence, people would rule over higher intelligence people. It happens, right? So I'm not saying that AI couldn't take over the world ever, but I think it's being overhyped. My hypothesis is that the whole idea of AI and all these scary stories about it, writing its own thing and taking over, is much more about hiding the true authority, right? So let's say they want to take your money, or they want to convict you of something, but they don't really want to say it's we who convicted you. Like it's an ideal front. It's AI, right? It did that. And AI, AI is all powerful. How can you argue with that? And that's another quality of neural networks. Another quality of neural networks, I'll tell you, that it lacks attribution, right? So I'm an applied mathematician. I worked in this area for a long time. We used to always build models that have formulas behind them. So when you have a formula, if you get some result, you can trace why that result came to be. Just like, like say a human being makes a conclusion, they can usually trace, at least rationalize why it came to be. In neural networks, that is impossible. They're really like voodoo. There's a lot of math neurons, but when you get a result, that's it. It's a result. You can't explain it. You can't argue with it, right? When you can explain something, you can argue with it. That's kind of the logic. If something cannot be explained, then it can be argued with. So the whole point about making AI, putting it on pedestal, I think, is about saying you don't question it. It's so smart. It's smarter than you. When in fact, it's plain fact that it's false. Human brain is far more elaborate than any AI algorithm that will ever be created. I will go on and it's so far from that. I mean, I would even go further that a neural network of a fly is much more elaborate than any neural network a human will ever create. So the reason they're elevating it, I think, is that it's a perfect front, because then you can't question it. When you ask a neural network, well, why did you do that? And there's no way to know. There's no way. There are some people, mathematicians, trying to create some models that will try to explain the result of a neural network. But that's another model. That's not the model that made the prediction, that made the conclusion. It's another model trying to interpret this result. And it's basically impossible in the way it's built. The more complex models get, the harder it is to explain anything. So what you have, imagine, like I read in China, they have a trial judge that's supposedly based on AI, right? That has a 98% accuracy or whatever, right? So the question is, with the human judge, at least you know who did that. At least they can explain their reasoning. And if it's unfair, you know that it's unfair. But with AI, it's so impersonal that it's just like, okay, here you go. It can't be argued with. It can't be explained. And that's why I think they're elevating it.
Well, I think you're probably right. But let's look at some things that it can do pretty well. You said pattern recognition. A lot of jobs are really repetitious. Our jobs aren't. Okay, ours are creative based. But there are a lot of jobs that are very, very, routine. And they are right that a computer can take over a routine job and do it. But there's anomalies in the system, and they need to be able to break out of that when a human needs to be able to override that to deal with an anomaly. Because computers can't deal with anything that's not built into their structure. If you didn't account for it, the computer can't see it. And AI can't see it unless it's accounted for somehow. And so there are benefits. I mean, I'm going to play the other side. There are some benefits to this because it's a really good tool if used properly, because you can analyze financial data really well if you can get information quicker, and they can take thousands of data and then analyze and then give you information that you can then interpret and do something with. The problem is when you take out the human element, when there needs to be decision making and creative aspects to it, that's when it gets all messed up.
Yes, certainly. I would disagree with the point about depending what you mean by financial data. I think in the financial markets right now, it's like there was an economist, John Maynard Keynes, has described it as a beauty pageant, except where you decide on a beauty queen not by the beauty of the queen, but what other people think. So you're trying to guess what other people think, and then the next level is that you're trying to guess what other people are guessing other people are thinking, and then and so on. So it becomes like a very psychological system, the financial markets. So
yeah, well, that's not what I'm talking about. Well, hold on. I want you to keep talking because you're so passionate about this. You've thought about it a lot. This is really great. I'm talking about financial data. Like, let's say which company out there that no one's heard of, and I don't know who the hell it is really kicking butt, is very profitable, but I just don't know, because there's thousands of companies, right? And so it can give you the top 10 list. The problem is when it comes to the stock market, and this is why I'm notoriously bad at it, is that it's manipulated and it's psychological and it's all these other things. I go and I look at the best company's performance and I invest in that and I do crappy. But it could, if good guys take over with it and use it for goodness, the right companies, they could use it to reward companies that are doing really well and stop the psychological BS, in the sense that they still make the decisions, but it would come up and say, these companies are the most profitable, people are buying more for them and they like them.
Yeah, I mean, I understand. I think that I would disagree there because even now, when you look at because I worked in investments for many years and fairly senior roles, I'll tell you that these neural networks that are applied there are mostly they're most effective at doing these, momentum and psychological type decisions that actually trying to guess the psychology, like a beauty pageant I described. When you're talking about undervalued companies or companies that are doing well, people don't know about, even the largest investment houses, they actually employ humans that fly to the company's office and look and check, and auditors and things like that. So
Oh, I get
actually,
it. Yep.
only humans can do that job well.
Well,
Now,
yeah,
but
but
you're
you
right
use
in
the
that,
data to figure out who they are, and then you go and do more due diligence.
but you don't need a neural network for that. There's like it's much more creative actually. It's like detective work, which neural network cannot really do unless you have a ton of data, right? Usually with
That's
such
what I'm
companies
talking
that you
about.
describe, there's not a ton of data. There's actually very little data, and you have to go and discern by looking at indirect things like what does the management look like, how are they, are they persistent, are they smart. But you're right in that neural networks do have applications. I mean, there are repetitive tasks that can be done, in farming and in manufacturing. There are a lot of them, and I think it will happen. I don't think there's no going back to that. It will change the world to some degree, but I think that we have to go back to the idea that what they cannot do anything creative, and creative doesn't have to be like being a poet or a musician or an author or even a blog or a blogger. Creativity can shine everywhere. Like for example, I mean, everybody knows that when you buy a handmade bread, it just tastes differently than anything else, right? So somehow creating bread is a creative process. There's lots of jobs for people, and what you hear is like people at WF and so on, they will decry this. Well, what are people going to do when we replace them with robots? Well, if you really cared, you would be developing kids with creativity. You would be helping them find their creativity. Whereas what we see is actually the opposite.
That's right.
People are being robbed and dumbed down and robbed of any kind of creativity. So my sense is that they're not too worried about that. I think that you would look for people to try to do. There are many jobs during industrialization that became impersonal that could go back to being personal again. And when you have and there's a lot of things that humans could do.
Don't you
And
think
there's
the
no reason to
personal
say that people would have no jobs. Yeah, go ahead.
don't you think the personal thing is so much better? I mean, when I get somebody who personally treats me with as a person, I'm like, ah, these people are great. When I get somebody who just wants to send me through this McDonald's drive-through, I'm like, I all my red flags go up and I don't want to be part of this. So I do think there is a gold lining here where we can say, okay, let's get back to the personal touch of what it means to be human.
Yeah, I mean, look at food, right? Growing food. There's lots of neural networks now in agriculture. There's like these drones that will direct tractors and they will do all this stuff. But personally, I can tell the difference when I buy tomatoes from somebody who grew tomatoes themselves, as opposed to this kind of mechanized, industrialized world. But I will tell you one more thing about neural networks that people don't appreciate. Yes, you can always say that technology is neither good or bad, right? It's like a knife, right? You can cut bread with it or you can kill people with it, is usually the line, which is all fair and right. But the problem with AI, I believe, is that, and I'm using this term again in jest, I mean, the problem with these algorithms, right, with big data algorithms is the proper way to call them, right? Big data patterns or whatever, is that they're much more, they favor bigger players, right? Inherently, because it's big data, it's big computing, and so on and so forth. So when you have a playing field that naturally favors gigantic players, what you're going to get? You're going to get a class of rulers and you get a class of serfs. So,
and that's what they want.
It's not quite fair to say that these algorithms are neutral. They're actually much more skewed against the humanity. For one good use it has, there are 100 bad ones. And I have one case I can tell you, but go ahead, yeah.
I was going to say, you're right. That's my background is data analysis in big tech. And
yep,
I got to
exactly.
tell you, the first thing, this is right out of college, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe how powerful this is. Because you could take a customer, for example, and know everything about that customer based on all the relationships and tie-ins everywhere. Now, it would take a computer's brain, I shouldn't call it a brain, a computer's processing power to make it, to get that information at the tip of your fingers, but to actually use it in a good or bad way would be a human maneuver. But I got to tell you, having that computing power behind bad guys is kind of scary. I mean, you look at what Elon Musk, he was warning everybody, but I have a hard time because Elon Musk seems to be really at the forefront of all this stuff, but then he was also warning people. So what do you think about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's quite obvious that he's doing kind of same things, talking about implanting chips in the brain and so on. I will say that I give you one example of AI, and then we'll make a generalization from that, where it's particularly dangerous, and not only like it's just devastating, is traditional social media. Okay, when you're on YouTube or Facebook, what people worry about when they say, well, they gather my data, is that I write a comment and this comment is stored. And certainly it is stored. But I'll tell you that there's much more data that goes in to your surfing a social network than you realize. When you scroll and you pause, just pause scrolling, you do nothing, just means like your eyesight stopped on a line. They can predict what you're reading at that moment, and it goes into your neural network. Everyone who you like, we're getting to a point where every human
power to make it to get that information at the tip of your fingers, but to actually use it in a good or bad way would be a human maneuver. But I got to tell you, having that computing power behind bad guys is kind of scary. I mean, you look at what Elon Musk, he was warning everybody, but I have a hard time because Elon Musk seems to be really at the forefront of all this stuff, but then he was also warning people. So what do you think about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's quite obvious that he's doing kind of same things, talking about implanting chips in the brain and so on. I will say that I give you one example of AI, and then we'll make a generalization from that, where it's particularly dangerous, and not only like it's just devastating, is traditional social media. Okay, when you're on YouTube or Facebook, what people worry about when they say, well, they gather my data, is that I write a comment and this comment is stored. And certainly it is stored. But I'll tell you that there's much more data that goes in to your surfing a social network than you realize. When you scroll and you pause, just pause scrolling, you do nothing, just means like your eyesight stopped on a line. They can predict what you're reading at that moment, and it goes into your neural network. Everyone who you like, we're getting to a point where every human being has their own neural network, and there are ways to do that now with massive computing power. So essentially, human beings are not completely rational. You know that, right? We're spiritual. We also have,
well, they're making it worse.
We're also making,
with what you're explaining.
Yeah, we're making decisions with what's called heuristics. It's a very effective way that God endowed us with to make decisions. But if somebody gathers enough data about the heuristics, about the way you make decisions, about what triggers you, they basically have a way to manipulate you like you wouldn't believe it. So essentially, think of it as like you have a castle, right? My home's my castle, and there are little like vulnerabilities here. So you allow somebody, so when you go to these social networks and you spend hours there, you allow them to constantly prod your psyche for weak spots. And then when they need to, they will use that. Like I read a book by Barack Obama's advisor for first campaign. He was the big data. He was in charge of big data. He wrote a book about it. So what they did was they built a profile in a network for every potential voter. Then they picked those that they can influence, and they at some point they created special lines for each person. So they found the vulnerabilities to sway people, and they hit into it. And everybody used it, not just Obama. I mean, the next election, Trump used it effectively. But the point is that that's just a limited period of time, a political campaign. Think about when they're gathering your data over years, or for your children's data.
Well, and that's why
they own them. They own them, and that's very, very scary.
It is very scary, and that's why we're seeing these camps, and they can inflame civil wars. They can inflame whatever they want. And so the psyops, I've been really focused on psyops and manipulation. This is the crux of it. And the only way you can keep them from manipulating you is to back off, zoom off, and say, okay, you got to start critically thinking and look at everything you do objectively and look at it from another angle. Purposely get yourself looking at things from another angle. You have to. That's why when I interview people, I try to get people who are independent or on both sides of the aisle and who are just trying to look at the truth. And a lot of people have just abandoned the parties. I just want to look at the truth, because if we get sucked into this party stuff, you're going to go down rabbit holes that they're forcing you down, and it's a bunch of lies and BS, and we really have to be careful. Some of it's true, and so you have to be careful to see what's really true and be very good with discernment, but you got to know they're manipulating you all the time. And they're using your emotions against you.
Be careful about what information you give about yourself. So when you go on YouTube with no particular purpose, like if you go to just see like one blogger, right? That's okay. I just go to that blogger. But when you're starting aimlessly searching, now you're giving off lots of information about you. And I would also recommend that for your kids, don't give them smartphones. I know it sounds crazy, but smartphones are a killer of the human psyche, right? So they're using all this data your child gives them when surfing, and then they use these vulnerabilities to hit your child basically in the weak areas of their psyche. So they're changing their hormonal system. They're learning to take joy, to get joy from things that are not natural, and they're losing ability to have joy from natural things. And many people, I have friends who said, she was a great girl, my lovely girl, until I gave her the smartphone and then the Instagram, and then I couldn't recognize her in a year. Well, you couldn't recognize her because you basically sold her psyche down the river. You gave somebody a power to learn everything about your child, to manipulate them, and to basically change their hormonal system. So I really think that people underestimate. So I kind of demolished one threat. There's no threat that AI will take over the world. It's not creative enough to outsmart humans ever. Okay? But there's another threat. There are some people that are using AI, this like veneer of mystical AI. They're using it to manipulate you. And what can you do to counter that? I think what you should do is try to give off less data about yourself. Try to use website. If a blogger has a website, go to that website instead of a social media. If you use social media, use social media that don't require, like, for example, that I was designer behind Bastyon, is a social platform where we don't take any personal data. So there's no phone number, email, and plus there's no AI algorithms that grab all this data, because there's just not, it runs on people's computers like torrent. So there's no like supercomputers to process your data. So you have to keep in mind, when you're absorbing information, social media, big tech social media is the worst place for you to be. And especially for your children, because you're basically creating your own profile that will be used against you. And we haven't seen anything yet. We're going to get to places where it's used very violently against you. Right now, they're just more gathering data, and they're using it to sell you stuff.
No, but they're building. They're building. You can see it. What they're doing, they're building it up right now. They're priming everybody. And priming is an important part of manipulation. And that's what they're doing right now.
Yes, absolutely.
It's really, I love this conversation. You're very passionate. You've learned a lot about it. And you have applied mathematics. People don't realize how much mathematics is behind so much. Well, we are going to continue this tech conversation. I don't know if it's going to be every 2 weeks or how often. We're going to figure it out. But thank you, Daniel. This has been a fun conversation.
Thank you, Sarah, and for all your work. Thank you.